You see, this is what it's all about, that rich intellectual conversation that truly deepens our understanding. Today, we're diving into the Sabah dispute in this third video of our series, driven by an incredibly thoughtful and detailed comment from one of you. This viewer laid out a comprehensive breakdown of many arguments supporting Malaysia's position, and it's precisely the kind of engagement I love to see. Now, before we dive in, a quick heads up. This is going to be a hardcore historical and legal deep dive. The Sabah dispute is one of the most intricate territorial claims out there, with layers of agreements, interpretations, and nuances. To truly grasp what we're about to discuss, I highly recommend you first watch my two-part video series on the history of the Sabah dispute. That foundational understanding will be absolutely crucial for making sense of the detailed points we'll be covering today. So make sure you're focused, because we're about to unpack some very complex historical arguments. My goal here is not to take a side or declare one argument definitively right or wrong. Instead, I would like to respectfully engage with each of the points raised in the comment, exploring the historical documents and legal interpretations from both the Malaysian and the Philippine Sulu perspectives. My aim is to foster a deeper, more nuanced understanding of why this dispute continues to be debated. Let's begin. Let's start with the first crucial point raised, the 1877 agreement between the Sultanate of Brunei and the BNBC, British North Borneo Company, signed a year before the well-known 1878 agreement with the Sultanate of Sulu. From the Malaysian perspective, as the commenter rightly points out, the 1877 agreement uses terms like grant and states that the entirety of North Borneo would be ceded to the BNBC for 15,000 Mexican gold coins. This perspective suggests that Brunei had the authority to grant this territory, and therefore the subsequent 1878 agreement with Sulu would be seen as redundant, implying Sulu did not genuinely own Sabah. However, those supporting the Philippine Sulu claim offer a different interpretation. They would argue that the historical reality of Borneo during the period was one of the overlapping claims and shifting spheres of influence. The Sultanate of Sulu's historical claim to the eastern parts of North Borneo, often based on previous grants from Brunei itself, predated and coexisted with Brunei's assertions. The fact that the BNBC still sought an agreement with Sulu in 1878 after their agreement with Brunei suggests that the BNBC recognized Sulu as a legitimate, if not the primary claimant to at least parts of the territory, or at the very least a power whose cooperation was necessary for peaceful administration. From this perspective, the 1878 agreement was not redundant, but rather an essential step to secure peaceful possession from all relevant parties. Next, a truly central point of contention, the meaning of the Malay word Pajak in the 1878 agreement. The commenter argues that the Pajak was intended to mean grant and cede, and points to later receipts being listed as cession payments, implying a permanent handover. From the Malaysian viewpoint, this linguistic interpretation, along with the later payment terminology, signifies a clear and permanent transfer of sovereignty. A cession, not a lease. Cession means to give something away permanently. Conversely, those who uphold the Philippine Sulu claim strongly dispute this. They argue that in the context of traditional Malay agreements and the Sultanate's understanding at the time, Pajak more commonly referred to a form of lease, rent, or pledge, where the underlying sovereignty was not extinguished, but rather an interest was granted in exchange for periodic payments. The continuous payment, even if later redefined by the BNBC as cession payment, is viewed by this side as fulfilling the terms of a perpetual lease or rental agreement rather than outright sale of sovereignty. The intent of the original parties, understood through their cultural and linguistic lens, is where the fundamental disagreement lies. Moving on to the influence of colonial powers, the 1878 basis of peace and capitulation agreement between the Sultanate of Sulu and Spain, and the subsequent Madrid Protocol of 1885 involving the UK, Germany, and Spain. The commenter highlights that the 1878 agreement with Spain signified Sulu's surrender of sovereignty, placing external affairs under Spanish jurisdiction. This suggests that Sulu's ability to act independently regarding North Borneo was greatly diminished. Further, Article 3 of the Madrid Protocol of 1885 is cited where the United Kingdom, Germany, and Spain recognize Spain's rule over the Sulu's archipelago, and crucially, Spain relinquished all of its claims on Borneo. From the Malaysian perspective, this clearly places North Borneo under complete British jurisdiction, reinforcing that Sulu, now under Spanish suzerainty, no longer had a say over the territory. However, proponents of the Philippine Sulu claim offer a different lens. While acknowledging Spain's assertion of sovereignty over Sulu, they argue that the extent of Spain's effective control of Sulu's peripheral territories, like North Borneo, was often more theoretical than actual. More importantly, they question whether Spain could legally cede or relinquish a territory that, from their interpretation, was merely leased by the Sultan of Sulu to the BNBC. If the original 1878 agreement was a lease, then Spain's renunciation of its own claim would not automatically extinguish Sulu's underlying proprietary rights. This view suggests that while the protocol solidified British administrative jurisdiction, it didn't necessarily validate the nature of the original title, which remains the core of the dispute. Next, we look at the 1903 Confirmation of Cession, signed between the Sultanate of Sulu and the British North Borneo Company. The commenter points out that this agreement states Sulu would grant and cede North Borneo and additional islands, with payments increasing from 5,000 Mexican gold coins to 5,300 Malayan dollars. Crucially, the commenter highlights the original Malay phrase, which you can see here on screen, and its translation. We have willingly surrendered to the government of British North Borneo instead of Pajakan, lease. For those supporting Malaysia's claim, this agreement is seen as highly significant, a clear and unequivocal act of cession by the Sultan of Sulu, using language that leaves little room for interpretations as a lease. The increased payment is viewed as a clear acknowledgement of this expanded and definitive transfer of territory. Conversely, the Philippine-Sulu perspective views this agreement with caution. They might argue that the 1903 document represents the BNBC's attempt to reinterpret or reframe the original 1878 agreement to solidify their claim rather than a truly free and uncoerced act of complete cession by Sulu. Given the power imbalance between the Sultanate and the formidable British North Borneo Company, it's argued that the Sultan might have signed under various pressures or without fully comprehending the Western legal implications of the changed terminology from his perspective. The increased payment from this viewpoint could simply be seen as an adjustment to an ongoing rental agreement for additional territories, rather than a new purchase price for a complete transfer of sovereignty. We then move to the 1915 Carpenter Agreement, signed between the Sultanate of Sulu and the United States. The commenter states that this agreement outlines the Sultan of Sulu giving away any power he has over his land to the Philippines, which was then under American rule. From the Malaysian perspective, this agreement signifies a further diminishing of the Sultanate of Sulu's authority, effectively transferring any remaining political or sovereign rights to the nascent Philippine government under American administration, making any future claim by Sulu over Sabah untenable. However, for those supporting the Philippine-Sulu claim, while the Carpenter Agreement indeed transferred the Sultan of Sulu's temporal powers, his administrative and political authority, the critical debate is whether it transferred the Sultan's proprietary rights or the underlying ownership of the territory. The argument is that while the Sultanate was stripped of its political governing authority, its rights as a landlord or owner, including the right to receive the annual payments of North Borneo, continued and were effectively inherited by the Philippine government or retained by the Sultan's heirs. This agreement is often seen by the Philippine side as the point where the lease payments should have then been directed to the Philippine government, or that the Philippine government inherited the right to pursue the claim of the territory itself. Next, the 1930 Anglo-US Border Convention signed between the United States and the United Kingdom. The commenter correctly notes that this agreement defined the border between North Borneo and the Philippines, with North Borneo remaining under British jurisdiction and the Philippines under American jurisdiction. From the Malaysian perspective, this convention solidifies the international recognition of the border and the legitimate British jurisdiction over North Borneo, further underscoring that the territory was firmly within the British sphere. On the other hand, the Philippine-Sulu argument views this agreement similarly to the Madrid Protocol, as an agreement primarily between colonial powers defining their administrative and political boundaries. While it delimited the colonial jurisdictions, they contend it did not extinguish any pre-existing proprietary rights to the Sultanate of Sulu, which they argue were inherited by the Philippine government. It settled the administrative boundary between colonial entities, but not necessarily the ultimate sovereign title based on the original 1878 agreement with Sulu as interpreted by the Philippine side. Finally, we come to the formation of Malaysia, the Cobalt Commission of 1962 and the 1963 Malaysia Agreement and Malaysia Act. The commenter rightly states that the Cobalt Commission was set up to ascertain the wishes of the people of Sarawak and North Borneo, with an overwhelming majority voting to unite with Malaya and Singapore to form Malaysia. And that the 1963 Malaysia Agreement, signed by the United Kingdom, Malaya, Singapore, Sarawak, and North Borneo, along with the Malaysia Act of 1963 passed by the British Parliament, legally established Malaysia. From the Malaysians' perspective, Sabah gained its independence from the UK and, through an act of self-determination, opted to join this new federation. This process was recognized by the United Nations, with the UN General Assembly and Secretary General acknowledging the formation of Malaysia, thus solidifying Sabah as rightful Malaysian territory. However, those supporting the Philippine Sulu claim present a different angle. While acknowledging the plebiscite and the formation of Malaysia, they argue that the options presented to the people of North Borneo were limited and did not explicitly include the choice of rejoining the Philippines. The Philippines' long-standing argument is that Malaysia's formation, specifically regarding Sabah, was based on a flawed premise, as the territory was never legitimately ceded by the original sovereign, the Sultanate of Sulu, whose rights they believe were inherited by the Philippine government. They contend that while the UN acknowledged the formation of Malaysia, the UN typically does not adjudicate pre-existing territorial claims of this nature. Therefore, from this viewpoint, Sabah's independence and subsequent entry into Malaysia, while an act of self-determination by the people of Sabah, did not automatically extinguish the underlying historical claim rooted in the original 1878 agreement. As you can clearly see, the Sabah dispute is incredibly complex. It's not a simple case of one side being entirely right and the other entirely wrong. Both Malaysia and the Philippines, and indeed the Sulu heirs, base their claims on different interpretation of historical documents, customary laws, international treaties, and principles like self-determination. My hope with this video has been to respectfully present the arguments on both sides for each of the key points raised in the comment. It's about understanding the different lenses through which this history is viewed, rather than reaching a definitive judgment. I highly encourage all of you to delve deeper, exploring the primary sources and form your own informed opinions. This is a conversation that benefits from open-mindedness and a willingness to understand diverse perspectives. What are your thoughts on these different interpretations? Let me know in the comments below, and please, let's keep the discussion respectful and constructive. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.